Have you ever pondered the question, does God exist? This is the existential query that has sparked countless debates throughout human history. Today, we're diving into a specific viewpoint that often emerges in these discussions: atheism. This perspective, held by many around the globe, challenges the traditional belief in a higher power. So let's set aside our preconceptions and embark on a journey to understand why some individuals conclude that God, as widely understood, isn't real. Let's dive into the world of atheism and its arguments against the existence of God. To understand the atheist perspective, we first need to define atheism. So, what exactly is atheism? It's a term that comes from the Greek atheos, meaning without gods. At its core, atheism isn't a belief system in the way that religions often are. Instead, it's the absence of belief in the existence of a god or gods. Now, it's important to note that atheism isn't a denial of gods or a declaration that gods can be proven not to exist. It's simply a lack of belief in gods, often stemming from a lack of evidence that they do exist. This can be a subtle but crucial distinction. Also, atheism isn't synonymous with immorality or pessimism, as is sometimes suggested. Atheists, just like believers, hold a wide range of views on morality, purpose, and the meaning of life. With this understanding, we can now delve into the main arguments of atheism. One of the most common arguments from atheists is the problem of evil. This argument is a philosophical debate that has been discussed and dissected for centuries, and it continues to be a significant point of contention in the discourse about the existence of God. At its core, the problem of evil is a paradox. It questions the existence of an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good God in a world filled with evil and suffering. If God is all-knowing, he would be aware of all the suffering in the world. If he is all-powerful, he would be able to prevent that suffering. And if he is all-good, he would want to prevent it. Yet, evil persists. So how can such a God exist? There are two main types of evil that this argument addresses: moral and natural. Moral evil refers to the harm that humans inflict upon each other, such as violence, injustice, and cruelty. Natural evil, on the other hand, encompasses events and disasters outside human control, like earthquakes, diseases, and hurricanes. Atheists often argue that the existence of such evils in the world is incompatible with the concept of a benevolent God. If God is all-powerful and all-good, why does he allow such horrific events to occur? Why would he permit suffering on such a grand scale? Theologians and philosophers have attempted to counter the problem of evil with various theories and explanations. Some propose that God allows evil to exist for the sake of free will, while others suggest that suffering is part of a grander divine plan that humans cannot fully comprehend. Yet, for many atheists, these explanations are unsatisfactory and fail to resolve the paradox at the heart of the problem of evil. So the problem of evil remains a potent argument for atheism. It highlights the tension between the traditional concept of an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God and the harsh realities of our world. This argument challenges the traditional understanding of a benevolent deity. Another strong argument from atheists is the lack of empirical evidence for God's existence. Now, what do we mean by empirical evidence? In simple terms, it's the kind of evidence that can be observed, tested, and verified using the senses. It's the cornerstone of the scientific method, where hypotheses are formed and then tested in the real world. Atheists often emphasize the importance of empirical evidence when it comes to beliefs or claims about the world. They assert that if something cannot be observed or tested, then there's no valid reason to believe it exists. This is where the concept of God, for many atheists, falls short. The existence of God, as proposed by most religions, is a supernatural claim. It's something outside the realm of the natural world and beyond the reach of scientific inquiry. As such, it's not something that can be tested or observed in the way we might test the theory of gravity or observe the effects of photosynthesis. Now, this doesn't mean that atheists are closed to the idea of a higher power. Many atheists say they would change their minds if compelling empirical evidence were presented. But so far, they argue, no such evidence has been found. This lack of empirical evidence leads many atheists to conclude that belief in God is not justified. They argue that it's more rational to withhold belief until such evidence is presented. After all, they point out, we don't believe in unicorns or leprechauns without evidence, so why should God be any different? Some people counter this by arguing that God is not the kind of thing that can be tested or observed. But for many atheists, This is precisely the problem. If God cannot be observed or tested, how can we have a reasonable belief in his existence? So the crux of this argument is not about rejecting God outright, but rather about applying the same standards of evidence to all claims about the world, including the existence of God. For many atheists, seeing is believing. The argument from non-belief is another compelling reasoning in the atheist standpoint. Let's take a moment to explore this fascinating argument. The argument from non-belief, in essence, says that if there were a God who genuinely wants every single person to believe in his existence, we wouldn't have non-believers in the world. This reasoning is rooted in the premise that an omnipotent, omniscient, and wholly good God would want to communicate his existence clearly and unmistakably to all his creations. Why, you might ask? Well, it's reasoned that a benevolent God would want to avoid the confusion, conflict, and even violence that often arises from religious disagreement. Additionally, it's assumed that such a God would want to give every individual the best possible chance to enjoy the benefits of belief, including moral guidance and eternal salvation. So, if there's a God who desires universal belief, why do we have so many people who sincerely disbelieve? Why is there such a wide array of religious beliefs, many of which contradict each other? The argument from non-belief suggests that this widespread disbelief and religious diversity is evidence against the existence of such a God. It's not that atheists are stubbornly refusing to believe, but rather, they simply haven't been provided with convincing evidence of God's existence. Now, counter-arguments to this reasoning often point to free will, suggesting that God has given us the freedom to choose to believe or not. However, critics of this counter-argument assert that providing clear evidence of God's existence wouldn't infringe upon our free will. After all, even with undeniable proof, we could still choose whether or not to follow God's teachings. In conclusion, the argument from non-belief is a significant part of the atheist viewpoint, positing that the very existence of non-believers and the diversity of religious beliefs in the world cast doubt on the existence of a God who wants universal belief in him. This argument highlights the existence of disbelief as an evidence against God's existence. We've explored some of the main arguments of atheism. Let's summarize. In this journey, we've delved deep into the heart of atheism, exploring its definition and the core arguments that form its basis. We began by defining atheism not as a belief system, but as a lack of belief in the existence of a higher power or powers. For atheists, it's not about denying God, but rather about not being convinced by the theistic claim of a God's existence. We then moved on to the problem of evil, a philosophical conundrum that asks why, if God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, does evil persist in the world? Atheists argue that the existence of evil and suffering in the world is incompatible with the concept of an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God. From there, we dove into the argument of lack of empirical evidence. This argument asserts that without tangible empirical evidence of God's existence, there's no reason to believe in a divine entity. Atheists often point to the scientific method, which demands evidence and repeatability, as a more reliable method for understanding the world compared to faith. Lastly, we examined the argument from non-belief. This is the assertion that if God truly exists and wants all humans to know him, then why are there non-believers? Atheists argue that the very existence of disbelief is evidence against an omnipotent God who wishes to be known. It's important to note that these arguments are not definitive proofs against the existence of God. Rather, they are perspectives that challenge the traditional theistic view and provoke thought and discussion. They're part of an ongoing conversation that delves into the deepest questions of existence, knowledge, and faith. In conclusion, atheism is not just about disbelieving in God. It's a standpoint that demands evidence, questions the compatibility of an all-powerful, all-knowing God with the state of the world, and challenges the concept of a God who desires universal belief yet allows disbelief to exist. Remember, understanding differing perspectives doesn't necessarily mean agreeing with them. It's about broadening our horizons, fostering tolerance, and promoting thoughtful conversation in a world brimming with diverse beliefs and worldviews. While these arguments don't conclusively prove or disprove the existence of God, they offer food for thought in the ongoing discussion about God's existence.